Hi, welcome to the Recovery Daily Podcast. I'm your host, Rachel Apasi. I'm a grateful recovering alcoholic and stroke survivor. And if you see chips and salsa in my teeth, just ignore it. Okay. Today's topic is balancing tolerance and boundaries. And I was thinking about this morning. The topic in my meetings were completely different than this, but for some reason this came up in my head. And I don't know if I know the difference between being tolerant and putting boundaries up. So I wanted to talk through it and we'll see what comes out of it, see what we can learn from it. So understanding tolerance, tolerance is for me what I feel like I practiced throughout my life more so than putting up boundaries or drawing boundaries. I shouldn't say putting up boundaries. That's like putting up walls. I was good at that too. But tolerance is what I felt like would get me to be able to coexist peacefully with others. It's like a vital aspect I felt like of life. And in recovery, I feel like we learn about being tolerant of each other, being accepting of everybody's different like views on their higher power and stuff. Even when they differ from our own. So tolerance helps us to be patient with other people and recognize that everyone is on their own unique journey. And we learn in the program to let go of this idea that we can control people, places, and things, and instead focus inward on our own growth and our own healing. However, tolerance does not mean that I allow other people to walk all over me. And maybe this came to mind because the meeting this morning was about accepting each other's beliefs, like not trying to push our own thoughts about a higher power on other people, and that we can choose our own concept. And then I was also talking about that neighbor of mine yesterday and how I tolerate him. But that's the fine line, right? Between tolerating him and putting up a boundary. That's probably why this came to my mind today. So tolerance is accepting the differences between me and another person, but not sacrificing my own well-being, my own comfort. I I understand that there is a limit to tolerance, and that is where boundaries come in. So boundaries are the lines we draw to protect ourselves emotionally, mentally, sometimes physically. They define what is acceptable and what is not acceptable and ensure that we don't compromise our values or our needs. And we make every effort to be tolerant to others in recovery, but we don't risk our recovery. So setting boundaries is not about being harsh, just like I was talking about with that neighbor, or unkind. It's about respecting myself and taking care of myself. So I think both tolerance and boundaries are the same thing, really. I mean, I am practicing self-care and self-respect in both situations. Setting boundaries, I think, can be just as challenging as tolerating other people. So, tolerating other people is like, to me, protecting them. Boundaries is protecting me. Like when I look at it that way, if somebody is, let's say, okay, let's still talk about the neighbor. So the neighbor and I are outside and he's got his dog and I've got my dog, and he starts talking about something that I don't agree with, which happens frequently. I tolerate that. And I feel like I'm protecting him from me, like kind of lashing out at him or telling him that he's wrong. So tolerance is protecting him. That's how I see it. And then boundaries is him actually shouting across the street to somebody on their cell phone, telling them to be quiet when we're outside in public. That is a boundary that I draw. I'm not going to stand there and be exposed to him when he's shouting at other people. That is where I start protecting myself. So I fear sometimes that when I'm setting limits to create a boundary, that I'm being intolerant or unloving towards others. But the truth is that healthy boundaries are essential for me to maintain my emotional health and my sobriety. Boris the bulldog is under my chair, sniffing and breathing hard, so I'm not quite sure what's happening. Get out of here, Bobes. Get out of here, Bobes. Okay, sorry. So boundaries help to manage relationships so that they are sustainable and respectful to both ourselves and to others. There's only so much that I'm going to tolerate somebody before I put a boundary up, you know? So how do we navigate the balance between, or that line between, I don't know if it's a balance, it's more of like a line. How do we know that when we've crossed over from tolerance into drawing a boundary? And doing it before we lose our shit on somebody, And it starts with self-awareness, like being in tune to our feelings and recognizing when we've begun to tolerate, when some conversation or interaction has gone from being a mutually enjoyable engagement or conversation to the point where you are actually tolerating something. And I've had several of these happen. Boris, stop it. I don't know what's happening. Back up, back up, back up. I don't know what's happening with him. Sorry, you probably want to get a snapshot of Boris. Boris, look up here. Hi, there he is. Hello, Bobes. You're interrupting our podcast. Say hello to everybody. There he is. Thank you. Okay, he's out of here. Go somewhere, Boris. Okay. Sorry for the interruptions, but yeah. So when we have begun to tolerate, and then when our tolerance then starts to be stretched, and then we start to feel resentful. It's like it just builds. It's like you cross over into tolerance, and it's for me when my tolerance flag goes up, I feel it immediately. At my smile turns from a real one to a fake one. And maybe a little more nodding than usual. And then once it's being stretched to its limit, I may start actually turning my body to start walking away or thinking up an excuse to get out of the situation. But if I'm stuck, which rarely do I feel stuck anymore, but there are times when you feel like, oh, I can't really get out of this, you start feeling resentful. And recently I was in a conversation with a different neighbor, and she was being very unaccepting of diverse people. And it went from one comment where she said something, and my tolerance flag went up, and I was like, this is not okay. What she's saying is not okay. And then she kept going, and it was stretching my tolerance limit. And then she kept going. And I would have walked away, but she just kept talking, and I didn't want to be rude. Isn't that weird? I didn't want to be rude, even though what I was hearing was incredibly rude, not towards me, but to other people. And so I started feeling resentful. I started judging her. Um, and then at some point, I was compromising my own needs too much. It was a sign to me that I needed to set up a boundary, that I am not going to keep talking to her. I've actually felt like I'm not really going to be very comfortable talking with her from now on. So I've been really trying to pull away from that relationship, because clearly we have different ideas about being kind and accepting to other people. So being aware of when that flag goes up, and managing how to break free from the tolerance before it goes into having to set a boundary, or somebody has already crossed a boundary that you maybe knew that you had, but you weren't expecting it to be crossed. So we have to be aware when we're setting boundaries out of fear or control, rather than out of self-respect or respect of others. And it's easy to set boundaries to avoid discomfort or difficult conversations. Super easy. I mean, I don't like confrontation. And so I will set up a boundary when I hear people raising their voice or something. That's crossed my boundary, and I'm leaving the room. No matter what's going on, I'm just going to leave the room. I can't deal with it. True boundaries are not about putting up walls, like I was talking about at the beginning of the episode. They're about creating healthy spaces where mutual respect can flourish. So one step in finding that line between tolerance and boundaries is to really check in, the step 10, checking in on our relationships. How do we feel after interacting with someone? When I review my step 10 at the end of the day, and I'm looking at, like, was I respectful to other people? Did I feel fear? Was I afraid of anything? Was I resentful towards anyone? How did that go? Um, did I feel, but then turn that camera around on the, I'm typically looking at, was I disrespectful to anybody else? Do I owe any buddy an amends? But also turning that around and saying, how did I feel afterwards? Was I treated with respect? Or did somebody treat me disrespectfully? Did somebody say something to me that caused me to be resentful? Or did I talk to somebody and it was just freaking draining? And that's the neighbor that was saying, I think, offensive things about diversity. But when I'm able to look at that and see how my interactions go throughout the day, I might be able to put up a boundary far before I had to be exposed to that neighbor saying that to me. And when I think back, there was a very brief conversation I had with her where she had indicated something that insinuated that she was intolerant of uh, other people's ways of life. And that could have been a great opportunity for me to put up that boundary. Another step is to make sure that we communicate our boundaries clearly and kindly. It's okay to tell somebody what you need in order to feel respected. And it is possible to do this without judgment or criticism. And just a simple statement, I could have said to her, I really don't agree with what you're saying. This is uncomfortable for me. For me, that feels like a confrontation. So maybe this is something that I can practice, because I certainly didn't do it then. I just let her keep talking and me just nodding, and I feel icky. I feel icky for letting her say that stuff to me and me not interjecting and being like, that's not okay. What you're saying is not okay with me. But I just really wanted to get out of there and just avoid her from that point on. So that's just how I chose to deal with the situation. Maybe next time I'll feel a little more courageous and speak up. So boundaries can be flexible. Tolerance doesn't feel so flexible, right? It feels like when I'm around somebody that is speaking to me about something that is offensive, for example, it's almost like I didn't consciously draw that line um, between enjoying the conversation and then all of a sudden being tolerant. I just all of a sudden became tolerant. They hit on a value of mine, and said something that I didn't agree with. So it really, tolerance seems like it's something that exists within us. It's already defined. And I would imagine that if I sat down and told you all of my values and, how I expect to be treated, how I expect other people around me to be treated, the things that I don't like other people to say, like, those are things that will get me into the area of if you cross it, now I'm just tolerating you until I can get away from you. If somebody says something that I just tolerate, for me, it's excusable. It's not changing our relationship. It's something that I'm saying, okay, I accept you for who you are and that this is a part of you. That's what tolerance is for me. Boundary is saying, this is not something that I want in my life, and I don't have to put up with it. You know, it's fine for you to be who you are. I accept you for who you are, but it's not, it's, I don't want it to be a part of my life. You know, these are all just my opinion, obviously, but I think it's good to like talk through this stuff. I mean, how often do we sit and talk about what does that really mean to me? What does tolerance and boundaries mean for me? So I think as I have grown in recovery, my boundaries have needed to adjust over time. I had really, really definitive boundaries in the beginning. Like I could not be around drinking, period, in the beginning. But those firm boundaries from the beginning have softened over the years of my recovery as I have gained confidence and resilience in my sobriety. And almost like with my symptoms, my stroke symptoms, in the beginning, I had really strict boundaries. Like I could not go on digital devices, period. And I'm smiling at myself because recently I have softened those boundaries. And I think that is why I'm feeling all of these really severe symptoms right now, because I started to gain confidence, and what I thought was resilience, what I thought was an adjustment to my threshold of what I can withstand as far as digital devices go. If you can hear the Boris panting, I apologize for that. So I think the key to all of this is to remain focused inward, remain honest with ourselves to ensure that our boundaries are not because of fear, but are serving to protect our well-being and not to isolate us from the world. Like if I decide that I'm not going to interact with this neighbor of mine, I'm choosing to do so because she is not healthy for me, emotionally, mentally healthy for me to interact with, you know. I need to be respectful of my own values and just be mindful enough to choose what I want to expose myself to and what I don't, because at the end of the day, I deserve that. I deserve to expose myself to things that add value to my life and make me happy. I don't need to expose myself to relationships that are unhealthy. You know, I want to be around supportive people, and not that it's all got to be about me, but I want to be in relationships where we support each other and we foster growth and we get to talk about happy things. That's what I want to do. I want to talk about happy things. I've got enough terrible stuff going on in my life. Not really. I just have a lot of symptoms. And I want to be around people that lift me up, not bring me down. So that's important to me right now. And that's what I've got for you today. So I learned a lot about myself just talking through this. So Thank you for listening to the Recovery Daily podcast, and I will talk to you tomorrow.